setup. Blah, 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 blah. Don't need auto key on. Make sure I have enough undos. Cool. All right. So right here where it says Mel and it has this window right here, just click there and hit Control V. When you hit Enter, that should happen. And that's what this script does. Cool, right? So in order to get this to be something that we can call upon time and again, we want to put it on a shelf. So all I wanted to do is make sure that what I type here made this pop up. Close it. I'm going to paste this here, highlight it, middle mouse drag it to my shelf. And when I release, it's going to go, what type of script is this? Well, this is a Mel script, so let's click the Mel button. And now it's right there. I thought I got rid of that. Okay, so this is my script. Now, right now, it's very nondescript, pun intended. Because it's a script, see? All right, moving on. Thank you. Obligatory laughter is welcome. So now in order to get this to look like something, we're going to use one of those icons we have, and we're going to rename this bugger. So in order to do that, there's this little triangle underneath a folder over here. See that? Right over here? Click on the triangle, go down to Shelf Editor, click that guy, and now what you're going to see is the shelf contents over here. It's going to say rename KK Controllers, KK Controllers. I'm going to leave that name right there, but what I want is an icon label. So right where it says icon label, I'm going to put KK Controls or something along those lines. So that'll give me a little label on here. Next thing I want to do is I want to change that hideous looking little icon. So here's what I do. I go right here to where it has icon name. I'm going to click on the folder, and it's going to put me in Prefs icons. Now what we should see, oh, there it was. What we should see is this folder that we just put in. Now these are all images from that script, okay? I just choose the first one because it gives me a box. That works for me. I just don't want to look at some hideous looking icon. I just need something that looks distinct. So I just choose VO1 XPM. If you want to choose one of these other ones, have at it. But VO1, that's looking good. So open, and then I'm going to go save all shelves. And now my custom shelf, I got KK Controllers script and the little icon. Whenever I need it, I click on it, and kabam, there is my script. This up here does what you might expect. It changes the color of the controller. These are all of the different controllers that you can get, and you can just scroll down to get a whole myriad of different shapes. You have a mirror function right here. So if your character is facing Z, you're going to mirror across X. Essentially what that means is you can set up controllers on one side of your character, mirror them across, and it saves a lot of time. So it's a pretty cool script. So I'm just going to close this because I set up my button. And I'm going to make another amazing ARM model. Hang on. Let me just go into my poly menu set and turn off interactive creation. Bam! Insta-ARM.
If you use a different computer, it's not going to load, right?
No, because this amazing model is far too much for it.
No, I meant the controller.
Yeah. So, yeah, this kind of thing is best to handle when you're going to do it. Because it's kind of like the selection set thing. It's going to go away. If you set up on your home computer, it'll stay. But if you set it up on these computers, because they have that deep freeze thing, when you restart, it's gone, right? Yeah.
Can I activate it on 2013?
Yeah. Yeah, this script works on 2013. It works on 2012. It works just fine. Okay. So, my amazing ARM model. Let me get this under control. Let's do like 8. I don't need that many subdivisions on axis. Let's go like 8 and 8. Look at that amazing arm amazingness. Maybe I'll do 12 better. That looks better. So cool, right? And I don't need caps, so I'll just take those off. It'll just give me an end gun there. I don't care. All right. So I'm going to go modify, freeze transforms, edit, delete by type history, just to clean it out. Call this something like left arm geo. It's descriptive, right? All right. Let's make my arm. So I'm going to pretend like their body is, in fact, let's make a body. Do cylinder. It's the best body ever. Look at that freaking amazingness. So cool, right? All right, let's make a head for our amazing body while we're at it. I don't know if you can handle my epic modeling skills. Hang on, hold up. Here we go. Kabam. Cue 2001: A Space Odyssey music, just for me. That's not how it goes. Okay. That's also just, you know what? It's okay.
Damn it! I tried.
I know. And you know what? That's all that matters, really. All right. So why am I creating a body this time? Because I want to make it abundantly clear which section of the arm I'm dealing with as I do this. So it should be a little lower, I think. There we go. He doesn't have a right. Shut it. Okay. Turn off grid. I go to the animation menu set. Grab my joint tool, click reset. Tear off my tool settings because I hate that. All right. So the spine is going to be in the center of this body, right? So I'm going to start at the clavicle. Bam. Clavicle for the win. I'm going to create the arm now. Shoulder. Elbow. Wrist. Hand. Enter. Okay. Turn on X-ray joints. Let me name this. So I'm going to call this L. Shoulder. Elbow. Wrist. And clavicula. And then I'm going to get a forearm twist joint up in here. So I'm going to go to the animation menu set. I'm going to go to skeleton, insert joint tool. Whoop. Hit enter. Name it. Almost there. Okay, so shoulder, I'm going to parent it to the clavicle just by hitting P. So there we go. I got a basic arm. If you look at it, you can see that I have a slight bend in it, but it's very slight. Just like I told you guys, everything shouldn't be mysterious. You guys should pretty much get it by now, right?
Yes.
It's all. Thank you. It's all there. You know what? I'm going to make it a little bit harder on myself this time. Instead of having an L-arm geo and then a body and then a sphere, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine this geometry so you can see how the weighting could be a problem and how we can use it. Why not, right? So I'm going to select all this geometry. Actually, let's choose this one last. And I'm going to go to the polygon menu set and go mesh, combine. And I'm going to go modify, freeze transforms, edit, delete by type, history. I'll rename it. We'll just call this one arm jack geo. Okay. All right. So next step, we're going to create a smooth bind on this guy. So because he doesn't, actually, you know what? I'm going to create a root joint because why the hell not? There. I'll make a root joint just for the sake of being thorough. I will move it because he's not centered to the world. We're going to have to kind of fudge it a little bit. So I'll bring it over there. Modify, freeze, transform. It's going to go, yeah, okay, like Mrs. Swan. We don't care. Call this root. And I will parent this to the root. Cool. So, to bind my skeleton to my one-arm jack geometry here, I'm going to select the root. I'm going to select the geometry. I'm going to go into the animation menu set. I'm going to go skin, bind skin. I'm going to throw on an interactive skin bind. You guys can throw on what you want because it's either a smooth bind or an interactive skin bind. You have that choice. You can't throw a rigid bind on though, just FYI. We only got to stick with one of the smooth bind options. So in Maya's infinite wisdom, it decided that my root joint should look like that. Not quite Maya, not quite. So I'm just going to kind of self-correct here just a little bit. More like this, Maya. Cool. I'm also going to normalize the weights on this skin bind. You guys remember that? Kadoosh. Bringing it back. We need to do that now so we don't run into any problems. So I'm going to select the geometry. Go skin. Edit smooth skin. Enable weight normalization. Doosh. Skin, that's the sound effect it makes, by the way. Skin. Edit smooth skin. Normalize weights. Whoop.
That's only if you choose the interactive skin bind.
Yeah, that's when you choose interactive skin bind. And basically this will just make it play nice. Alright, so I'm going to use the capsules to set kind of a standard weighting on here. So clearly that's not looking right for the arm. So I'll scale up using these kind of red circles here. And ultimately what I'm looking for is I want this middle section to be a bright red, so it's absolutely selected. All right. And because I want this arm affected, I'm just going to drag it over here. You may see that it's kind of affecting a little bit of the body here. If you press Shift, you can kind of pull that scale point back a little bit to wonk out the shape. And that's kind of like a decent compromise. Okay. Same thing with pulling it out. If you want to have more influence, you can hold Shift and pull it out to get like more drop off. All right, so that's looking pretty good for that one. Next, okay, not so much here. I'm going to turn on the wireframe. But it looks like we only got one. It's probably hard for you guys to see. Let me see if I can change that a bit. Oh, screw it. I'll deselect so you can see. So I got basically one edge loop right at this upper part of the arm. So essentially we want that one to be affected both by this elbow joint and by this forearm joint to a certain extent. So we're going to kind of play with fire a little bit here and try and make it kind of an orange. These aren't absolute, by the way. It's just my preference for right now. It's the first step in what I'm doing. Go to the next one. Now this one's a bit different because essentially we're going to have two edge loops on here. We got this one over here. We got this one. So this should have a little bit more influence. There we go. Something like that. Not so much on this one because we need it to twist. So I'll try and get it to be kind of a happy medium. So maybe I'll make this one a little less. Something like that. Ah, screw it, I changed my mind again. There we are. Okay, and the reason, actually that was a horrible idea. Why did I do that? I'm going to have the wrist only effect here. And that's ultimately what I'm doing. I'm using this color to determine to what extent the joint I have highlighted is going to affect these verts. So if you see an unevenness like this, just level it off with these capsules. All right, so let's test it and see what we got. So I select this, hit E, I'll rotate it. Okay, so we have issues. Essentially what's happening here is the values on here are getting left behind, which means that probably some of the weight on these edges is going to over here. So capsules, not always our bestest friends. And maybe what we have to do here is just exert more influence as we're going. And if you want to check this, what you can do is you can select that elbow there, and on frame 1, without changing anything, you can hit S to set a key, change the time, create a movement, and hit S again to set a seconds key. So when you delete these, it'll go back to what it originally was, but when you scrub the timeline, it'll move. And that'll allow you to go back into a place like this, select that joint, and then exert more influence. And you can see as I exert more influence, it kind of listens more to what I'm telling it. There we go. So that's looking better. So that's better for the shoulder, at least. Might have to change angle a few times and scrub the timeline to get kind of a rough idea where we're going with this. Might need some more influence here. Might need some more influence here. All right, let's do this again. All right, so to me now it looks like those capsules pretty much got the arms in order. So at least as far as the shoulder is concerned, so I'll move on to the next one. I'll take this one, I'll delete the keys, so it goes back to what it was, delete. I'll select the elbow, same thing, frame 1, I'll hit S to key that initial point. I'll give it some time on the timeline, I'll bend it, and I'll set a second key, so that when I scrub the timeline it bends. And then I'll go and do the same thing here, where I will try to reach a decent compromise with these capsules first and foremost. Now this one looks like it gave me a pretty decent spot by just moving this in a little bit. Like that's a pretty decent compromise as far as these capsules can hack. If I want it to have a little more influence here, I'll just bring this back, or scale it down, bring it back, scale it down, bring this forward more so it affects more. It's almost like a little dance here. All right, so I like that for the elbow. On to the next bit. I'm going to delete my keys. Delete. I'll move on to the forearm twist. Now the forearm is basically going to twist like this. So we needed to handle that. So we don't want that to be moving so much. We want this one to be moving. So when we weight this, it's going to be a little bit more like, yeah, no. No on that one. Maybe I'll bring this guy all the way back. Exert more influence on that. Forgot to set my keys. So I'll grab this one. Set a key on frame 1. Set a key on frame 24 with it twisted. I'm going to go like 45. And I'll set a key on that. And then that way when I scrub this, I can see how that twist is going. I probably want a little bit of dampening over here. So maybe I will bring some of that back. All right, let's see. That's better. Cool. I like it. Kill those keys. Onto the wrist. Keyframe 1. Frame 24. And I'll bend this in the way that it would commonly bend. Hit a second key so that when I... Oh, son of a monkey's uncle. Alright. S. There we go. So if you see weirdness like this, that's because there was some value drop off here and somehow it assigned value over here to over here. So, and that's probably because there isn't any kind of solid value here. It's kind of close but no cigar. So So if we bring a little bit of value from another area into that, it may get rid of it. And if it doesn't, it may simply be an area where we have to go back and fix it. Sad, but oh well. Yeah, it's trying to be a punk a little bit. All right, I think that's the best we can do for now. Actually, the wrist is kind of looking all right. All right, so once we got that, we're going to go back and look at them all bit by bit now. So, selecting arm, bend it down. Okay, it's looking all right. That's not quite what I would like. So we might come back and just exert more influence, less drop off, scale it up. Might not be perfectly aligned. Grab it again, hit E. Okay, better. Oops. It's a little bit rigid, but that might be easier to weight by hand. We'll see as we go. All right, so essentially now those capsules gave us a rough weighting where we didn't have to go in and paint any weights, so cool stuff. So now I'm going to select the geometry, double click on the little paintbrush skin tool here, or you can go skin, edit smooth skin, paint skin weights tool option box, and it'll bring this up too. Change it to color ramp so I have a better idea of what I'm looking at. White is 100%, black is 0%. Blue is almost 0%, red is almost 100%. It's a little bit different color scheme than the capsules, but just FYI. And what I'm going to do here is now I'm going to go through my joints and see what we got. So if I look at the clavicle, for some reason, it looks like it exerts no influence over here, but it exerts some over here, even though it's way the hell gone over here. If that shouldn't exert influence over here, what I can do is, I'm going to turn off joints temporarily, and I'm going to select the verts of my arm. I'm going to go back to the skin weights tool. I'm on clavicle. I'm going to say I want 100% opacity because I want to absolutely tell it what to do. I'm going to replace the value because I don't like the value that's on there and I want to tell it absolutely what value. I'm going to turn value down to 0, and I'm going to click flood. Essentially what we've done, we've said clavicle, no. No on those verts, please. Go to the shoulder, see what we got. Now it should have reassigned some of that value to over here. Now you'll notice we have 100% over here, and then it's suddenly not. So in this case, I'm going to switch it to add. I'm going to turn my value to, in this case, I'll just give it 100%. I'm going to say add. Because we've normalized our weights, we're not going to have any issues, and I'm going to add 100% there to make it absolute. Okay, as far as this guy is concerned, if we want some of that value over here, I'll drop my value down to 0.1, which is 10%. I could even go lower as like 0.05 if I want to be like really careful about it. I'll use B to click, drag, scale my brush. And I'll start seeing what kind of values. So it looks like they're about 10% off roughly. So maybe I'll switch this back to 0.1. And I'll paint back in that value. Looks like I missed one over here. Part of the problem is my brush stroke is set to have dampened edges. Not exactly ideal because you sometimes get this happening. So make sure you're on that one so that when you tell it to do something, it listens explicitly. So I'm just going to add 0.5 to that one to kind of get it back into range. Actually, that one and that one and that one. And I'm working in baby values. If you want, once you got it to pseudo what you have in mind, you can press Shift and smooth it. But that's a dangerous tactic, FYI, because sometimes what it'll do is it'll choose joints over here or joints way the hell over here to reassign those smoothed values. So just be careful on that. Elbow. This is now going to be, if I hit 4, it's going to be the joint that's around here. Or I could show joints and show you that. 5. So this is this one. That's looking pretty good, actually. I might want it to have less influence right in this twisty area here. So the way you fix that is you're going to go to the forearm, and now we'll add value on that edge loop to this forearm. So add, stay the same. I'm going to leave it at 0.05, and let's just paint across. Okay, doesn't look like it's changing much to me as I do this, because we're working in tiny values. So essentially what I'll try and do is get it somewhat consistent before I raise that value up. Doesn't look like it really wants to. It's like, no. Fair enough, Maya. We'll just stay in baby values. But essentially green is a midway point. So this is going to be a little bit more neutral now when we go back to elbow. You can see we've taken value away. So let's raise this to 0.1. 0.1, 10%. Add 10%. Cool. Let's go back to elbow, see what we got. Interesting. So we have to wonder, where did it reassign that value? And the worry is that it's on wrist or hand, or clavicle or root. Looks like it's not. It looks like we're simply not far enough along in this value. So I'm going to add 10 more percent. Okay, look at elbow. Starting to get to a more neutral pose there if you look. Back to forearm, 10 more percent. Right, let's look at elbow. All right, there we go. That's looking pretty neutral. So we probably don't want any of the wrist area attached to the elbow, which is way the hell over here. So let's do replace, zero out our value at opacity 100% again, and we'll just paint those off. Forearm, it's looking pretty good. It's got drop off here. Look at wrist. Wrist is looking pretty good. Hand, I don't really want hand to have any influence, so I might simply flood a removed influence at value of 0 on this. Kabam. So now it basically is going to raise up the wrist value. Wrist, I don't want to affect this now, so let's paint a replacement over here. That'll just reassign those values. And we'll go back looking to see if this is what I had in mind. And this is looking a lot more like what I would want. As for root, I'm basically going to want the reverse of our setup here. So this time, I'm going to grab the verts of the head and the body, because I don't really care about clavicle, to be perfectly honest here. Not on this model anyways. But what I do want is I don't want any chance of my joints, when they move, to affect the position of the body. So I'm just going to kind of hard assign all of this geometry to the root so it doesn't move or isn't affected. So 100%, switch it to add, flood it. Should go solid white, which it did. And there you go. There's your basic refresher in weighting and weight painting. The only thing I didn't cover in here was the component editor, so just for the sake of being thorough, let's say I want to specifically assign weights to these verts right at this edge here because I don't like the verts. Actually, you know what? Let's choose 2 rows. Okay, so I want to reassign these 2 sets of edge loops here. So I'm going to select those vertices, and I'm going to go to Window, General Editor, Component Editor, Smooth Skins. So Smooth Skins, open up your window a little bit more, and what you'll see are the verts right over here, and the joints that are influencing it, along with the total. The total should be 1 no matter what. If the total is not 1, if it is either more than 1 or less than 1, it means you need to normalize your geometry. Because at either more or less than 1, Maya is guessing what you mean. which means that when you actually tell it what to do, it's going to go, I don't know, I guess you mean kind of like this. There's a whole bunch of complicated math behind it, but ultimately it's Maya assuming. Right? You don't want Maya to assume. You want Maya to do what it's told. So normalize weight so it goes to 100%. And then that way, when you change these values, 0.5, it's going to reassign what's left to its surrounding joints. Now, I don't want it to be at 0.5. Could have sworn there was a... Let me see here. Let me see if I fixed it. Okay, cool. But yeah, if there's a specific area, like say in the face, or assuming, of course, you have a joint-based facial setup, or if your fingers are a common area of trouble, because your fingers are always in close proximity to other geometry, other bits of geometry, and there's many joints. So in areas where the geometry and the joints are close together, it's very easy for skin weighting to get confused. That's where the component editor really shines, because you can go in and you can say, I want this specific set of joints to have this specific weighting, and it'll just do what you tell it to. Okay? So there you go, basic weight painting, and here's the result. Move this. I don't have any of that weird hanging back business. I bend this. It reaches a decent compromise. I twist this, and this has a dampened rotation like I would have wanted it to. So, no one technique, although I suppose you could argue that the component editor is a perfect technique so long as you have a mathematical mind. Yeah, because if you actually want to go and select verts and then assign percentage values to weight things, you could handle the entirety of the model that way, but man, that would suck. So, the capsules are good for getting you in the ballpark, but you're still going to have to go back in and paint weights, right, ultimately, because they screw up. I mean, there's no nice way to put it. They're not perfect. They screw up. So, and the component editor, it's also a must for times that call for it. Anyways, so that's a skin bind. So now we have an arm. It doesn't screw stuff up, but this is our stock arm. In order to get our IK arm, we're going to duplicate it. So Control D. And it's basically just duplicated at the shoulder. What that means is this clavicle is now both the parent of the duplicate and the original. So we don't get lost. We're going to immediately assign a prefix to either IK or FK. In this case, we know this is our duplicate because it says L shoulder 1. Since this is the senior-most parent, it couldn't exist at the same level in the hierarchy as the original without changing the name. Because otherwise you have L shoulder and L shoulder, right? And Maya would go, I don't know what that is. So in order to fix that, it immediately assigned a 1 to the end of it. All of the other joints have the exact same names as the duplicate, as the original. So what we're going to do is we're going to assign a prefix of IK or FK, depending on what we're working on. In this case, since I'm going to recap how to set up IK, we're going to assign IK underscore as a prefix. But we're always going to have to go back and take off that 1, or it's just going to be slop that was left behind. Okay, so the way you do that, and I always forget this computer has this issue, so I'm going to bring this menu down a little bit. You guys can see. It's a fine line here. There we go. Okay. So you go to Modify menu, and you have this one called Prefix Hierarchy Names. Choose that one, and you're going to say IK underscore. Oops. And you're going to OK. And right off the bat, I'm just going to highlight the name, take off the 1, and hit Enter. All right. So if I click my down arrow, it's going to send me to the children. Look at the names. They all have IK in front of them now. So I'm not going to get confused. Cool. So that's IK. So Coming back?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Hence
Just make
the be right back. BRB, don't take.
don't be verb. Don't take computer.
Hell yeah. Sweet.
Yeah. I'm nervous to go through this with you gone, though. I gotta say, because you might be missing out. Do you have this already?
I've been. About to get Starbucks.
You're okay. Well, your decisions are your own. God be with you. Okay. So in order to frame up this entire hierarchy quickly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the end point on this chain, the littlest child. In this case, it's going to be the hand joint. But on your guys' joint chains, in all likelihood, it's going to be the tips of the finger. And the reason I do that is, it'll make sense in a second, trust me. And the reason I do that is when I open the outliner, if I hit F, it'll expand the entire hierarchy. So let me just show you what I mean. I'm going to drag a selection just around this little endpoint, kabam. So right now I have both the IK and the base selected on that hand because they're duplicates, right? They exist in the same space. Now I'm going to open the outliner. Now this is what my skeleton hierarchy looks like for this arm. Now imagine that it wasn't just an arm, but 2 arms, 2 legs, a spine, and a head. And that's what the outliner is going to show you. It's going to be like, oh, by the way, here's the root. It gives you the parent by default. Now you could spend a half day clicking on these little plus signs to expand your hierarchy, node after node if you want. Or you can take the easy route, which is to select the children joints of the area you want expanded. In this case, it's going to be my left arm, my left arms. Open your outliner, hover your mouse over here with it highlighted, and just hit F to frame it up. And what it'll do is it'll basically expand the entirety of the hierarchy down to that joint you have selected in order to show it to you here. So we basically used Maya against itself. Okay. Now the reason I did this was because I actually don't want one duplicate arm, even though that's what we did last week. We're going to need 2, because we need an FK and an IK and a base. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the base shoulder, and I'm just going to grab it in the outliner here, and I'm going to hit Control D. Now that gives me a 3rd joint chain. Once again, modify, prefix hierarchy names. This time it's going to be FK underscore. And we're going to go OK. Take off the 1. Kabam. So now you can see how this one's collapsed. Let's do this one more time. Little selection, endpoint, F. All highlighted. Okay. So basically now I have 3 duplicate arms all starting at this shoulder and tying in to the clavicle. The parent of all of them is this clavicle, and you can see it in the hierarchy here. If I were to rotate this clavicle, they would all pretend like they're 1 arm. They're not. They're 3. The reason we duplicated these arms after we did the skin bind, just to make this abundantly clear, I know I covered it last week, but just as a refresher, is because if I hadn't, you wouldn't see root, L clavicle, L shoulder, L elbow, L forearm, L wrist, L hand. You'd see all of that times 3. And you would literally have to go in and say, okay, the FK on every single one of those joints is at a 0 value for the entirety of the geometry. The IK on all of those individual joints is at a 0 value for all of that geometry. But by duplicating them after the fact, we've excluded them from the skin bind. They are basically now just joints hanging out, not affecting our geometry. Not yet, anyways. So, the downside, however, is we now need to be able to access both the FK and the IK skeletons, and now we can't use the viewport. Why can't we use the viewport? Because if I click on one of these joints here, I don't know which one I'm selecting. How do I specifically click on IK? This is exactly right. This is where naming comes in handy. If you have kept up with your names, when you look at a hierarchy like this, you don't even need to see this mess because it is all clearly laid out. Yeah.
So at this point, it should consist of three arms. The IK arm. I'm sorry.
Technically 6 arms and 6 legs because you got 2 sides.
Right.
Yeah.
If IK and FK are the only 2 options that an animator would use, what would be the purpose of the original joint?
I'm going to get to that when we get into IK, FK switches. But since you asked, I'll jump ahead.
Well, you don't have to.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
So when you look at trying to decide how best to address this, because, all right, so these duplicate joints we have, they are joints, and they could be bound to geometry, but the way in which we're using them is basically target points. The reason we duplicated them is because they correspond one-to-one with the original, which means that when we tell the original to follow one versus the other, if there is a change to it, it will adhere to that change. And if I tell it to choose the other one instead, we can blend between those 2 points, and it will know how to move. If we had recreated that joint chain, and one of the local rotation axes were off or something, what could potentially happen is that when it switched to that other joint, it would flip around on its way over there. But because we handle this in a very methodical manner, what it should do is switch smoothly between the one and the other. Which means that as you animate, you can switch between systems, either IK or FK. Some rigs you will get, on respectable sites don't have that ability, and it's simply because they didn't approach it in this way, right? It's because those transforms are flipping around, either 180 degrees, 360 degrees, or any variation thereof. But because we're using duplicates of our original, we're good to go. That's incidentally also why we took such great care that that original base joint system would work by itself. Knowing that it works means we can also count on these other systems working. If we hadn't, and we had only made sure those duplicate systems worked, we would be creating a problem for ourselves going down the road. The only, and this is going to sound a little bit contradictory, but the only actual joints we really give a crap about in our entirety of our rig are our base joints. These duplicate joints, to a certain degree, don't matter for Jack. And the reason I say that is because the only ones that are telling the geometry how to move are these base joints. When you look at a character in-game, for example, they don't have these duplicate joints because they have taken the animation and they have baked it onto these base joints. When you create animation, even though you are animating on, say, the IKL shoulder or the FK shoulder, because the root joints are told to follow one or the other, they are still moving. What you then do is you go back and you take these root joints and you bake the animation onto every single frame. So essentially you wind up with a kind of motion capture. So for setting keyframes, we use the helpers. So we can actually have an animator-friendly setup. But when it comes time to export, we don't need these. In fact, we would probably create an entirely separate set of geometry or a separate rig that didn't have these joints attached to it. The kind of setup I typically make is one that's called a broken hierarchy, where these joints aren't tied in to a clavicle, but it uses a constraint system, so they sit outside of that hierarchy. The advantage of that is that you can select the root and the entirety of the joint chain, bake the animation on this, and then these guys are kind of irrelevant, because once you hit export, it only focuses on those joints and that geometry, and these ones were just there to help it along, if that makes sense to you guys. Right? But mean, how to put this? This is a very traditional way of rigging, and that's why I show this, is because there is a lot of carryover even in more complex rigging systems. Once you understand this concept, you can add upon it, right? But this is how rigs have been created for a long time, so it's not the most cutting edge. It definitely works though, and it does the trick. But yeah, I mean, we don't have a semester, we don't have 2 semesters, so this is how we go, right? In any case, that's why the duplicate. So I'm going to create my IK system now. Actually, how many of you guys need a break? Anybody? 1?
Just take a break.
2?
I do
Okay,
know.
so you guys do need a break.